This is Planes, and the person behind the channel. And this channel has been going on for about a year, and it's really been exciting to watch it grow. But my name is Adrian, but less about me and more about the channel and obviously the topics I want to talk about today. And at the heart of it are really two things: the latest update on the Air India 171. Now, we know that the report has been submitted to the Indian Civil Aviation Authority, and online there's so much speculation about why did the plane crash? And I think it's perfectly normal. We human beings like to have things that we can explain. When things are unexplained, it just appears confusing and just doesn't make any sense. But obviously, people are going to speculate, and therefore, I'm not going to criticize anybody for that. It's perfectly understandable. Now, there's a requirement for the report, the preliminary report, to be published within 30 days. Now, the accident was, if my memory serves me right, was on the 13th of June. So not long to go before the report comes out, although there's some suggestion that maybe the Indian Civil Aviation Authority, which is not obliged, as it appears, to publish the report. There's been one example in the past when it has decided not to do so, might decide not to publish it, in which case, that would certainly just feed the speculation. But the thing about the speculation of what might have happened, there are so many possibilities. If you just think about a normal plane that has essentially over 1 million components, so many things can go wrong. Although we know from air traffic accidents, it doesn't tend to be one thing, it tends to be a series of things that just go wrong, and it's really awful. And we know that planes are safe, and this is why when we have these accidents, of course, and I certainly was on the flight shortly after the crash on June 13th, and as we were taking off, did I think about that? Oh, yes, I did. Was I worried? I am a normal human being. Of course, I was worried. But, I chose to go on the plane, and in that case, there was nothing I could do. But we know that at any one time, over about 1 million people are on a flight. So, yeah, it's generally quite safe. But I guess it's one of those things where we go into a plane, we have no idea who's in the cockpit, and we just have blind faith. We want to go where we want to go. We know it's generally safe, and then we do that. And the thing about the speculation is that obviously with the engine failure, I just want to make, or possible engine failure, I just want to make essentially two observations. The first is that there's a lot of talk about, okay, it might have been the engine, it might have been one, it might have been two. But when you think about the examples of situations when there was for example, I remember UL Airlines 178, I think that was in 2019 in Russia. And what happened is that on takeoff, there was a flock of birds, and it ended up being ingested in both engines. One gave idle power, the other one was slightly damaged but could give, more power. But what happened is that it ended up landing in a cornfield by chance. I mean, the pilots were called heroes of the Russian Federation. It turned out that they were not quite as heroic. They didn't follow the procedure. And as the co-pilot said at the time, well, it's one thing to plan as to what things should be. It's another thing, or training, because they said to him, did you follow your training? And he said, well, it's one thing to talk about following your training. It's another thing to face up to the reality of the pressure of that situation, when all of a sudden you have to be calm enough to be able to think in that really stressful situation. And in that case, the pilots didn't have a lot of time. And you can see with the Air India 171, whatever went wrong, they didn't have a lot of time. Not enough time to, as it were, react. Where another example of a case where maybe the pilots had more time was the Air France 447, which was a flight from Paris, I think, to Brazil, I think possibly Sao Paulo, if my memory serves me right. But in that one, they had more time. They were at cruise altitude, and then due to icing in the pitot tubes, what happened was that they started getting speed readings that were not accurate. And the upshot of it was that whilst they had time, they were trying to work out what was going on. So regardless of what the pilots might have said, do you have enough time in that situation to work out precisely what's going on? It's really very difficult. Planes are really complex. So I'm certainly looking forward to the report when it comes out. I'm certainly going to read it, and I might do a short video on that. But obviously, depending on how much information it provides, and it's only a preliminary report. But what we do know is, for me, it's not so much what's in the voice recorder, it's what's in the flight data recorder, because that would tell us about what the the configuration of the plane at that time, which is really what matters more than anything else. So I'm going to stop on that for now and just move on to the second point, which is really about Russian aviation sector, and a lot of things are going on because obviously following 2022 and the sanctions, they've had to try and do a lot of things within a short period of time. And the thing about it is that a lot of people focus on the planes, and I understand that. Come on, the planes are exciting. You are on the flight, you're climbing, you're descending. It's really fun, and you enjoy it. But then, plane is a wonderful piece of engineering, and as I've said, planes have over 1 million components. So even though the Russians had done work prior to 2022 on the MC-21 and the SJ-100, the urgency wasn't there at the time to make everything, to try to get to the outcome that they're seeking, or they were seeking at the time. And what we have is that there's a whole, people should not forget the whole infrastructure that is involved in maintaining a plane. You have this where you have to manufacture it, but obviously you're going through a point with both the SJ-100 and the MC-21. Both their tracks are slightly different because the SJ-100 is as an import substitution. So essentially the whole plane with Russian parts. Whilst because you already had a plane that was working, whilst the MC-21, you're really trying to build a new aircraft. And that project has been delayed simply because the sanction, there have been incremental sanctions. I should say that if I'm sweating like a pig, it's because it's really hot in London today. I'm not sure about what the temperature is, but I know that, and I'm upstairs, and with insulation in the loft, it feels like I'm baking away quite, very, not very nicely for anyone to eat, but I'm baking away. That's enough to say. Roasting, perhaps, is the more appropriate word. So as I say, I want to talk about the infrastructure and what the Russians are doing. And I think what's really interesting, and there are criticisms for them. There's praise, there's criticism, but one of the things that I think it's just you have the manufacturing infrastructure, but really important is that you have the maintenance, repair, and overall structure. Because these planes, you have following a flight, you may have an issue with the plane itself. The ACAS messages. It may well be that the pilots report that something's not working quite well, and then you have routine maintenance, depending on whether or not it's every 2 weeks, depending on what it is that you want to check and what it is that you want to get done. All of that takes a lot of time, and that means you have to have the infrastructure in the right places. Now, the whole idea is that with both planes, initially, is that they're just going to be operating in Russia. And the one thing quite interesting about the mindset of the Russian leadership, I always tell people to remember that the leadership itself are people who were born and grew up under the Soviet Union. So in an element, they're not natural capitalists. They are, as you would call it, learned capitalists. And in terms of, if you think about the previous system, central planning, trying to get everything done in a particular way just to make sure that things work really well. But we know that the central planning system had many flaws. And I think whilst there have been improvements, it's not surprising, and if you speak to Russians, they'll certainly tell you about some of the, the administrative state, how, the system can be really unresponsive to to things that happen. You have, for example, people who have a block of flats and there's a problem and they decide to club together to try and fix what the problem is rather than wait for the central system to get it done. So the thing about the maintenance, repair and overall the MRO is the Russians have it at the moment in 3 places, which started operation in 2023 to service, repair and modify the MT-21 and the SJ-100. They're in Murmansk, which is sort of northwest Russia, in by the White Sea, and forgive me for my pronunciation, it's Arkhangelsk, sort of in northwest Russia, and then in the Komi Republic. I'm sure you may know that the Russians have these semi-autonomous republics. Some of these places that you need a visa to go to. And these 3 stations began operating in 2023 to service, repair and modify MT-21 and SSJ 100. But you think that if you're trying to do it all over the country, you need to be setting up, repair facilities all over. And it's quite interesting that the main Russian airport at Sheremetyevo, there's supposed to be a dedicated maintenance hangar complex for both the MT-21 and the SJ-100. And when will that be commissioned? I mean, think about it, commissioned in 2026. So if you have 2 planes that you're thinking that, okay, with the SJ-100, you're going to have that done, you're going to have the certification process completed this year, and the MC-21 in 2026, you would think that for them to enter into serial production, you would think that at your main airport that actually the dedicated hangar would already be there. It should not have to wait till 2026. And that is one of the problems. And then there's a medium-term expansion plan by 2030. Then you're trying to have MRO hubs in Vladivostok, Khabarovsk, and Novosibirsk, and other places, including near Yakutsk. Well, 2030, you say that this plane will be in operation, or both planes will be in operation in 2026. It's supposed to fly all over. You need, if you think about airlines, they have maintenance, not just at their home base, but where they're flying to. You need engineers who come out every time to look at the plane, to check it as is needed. They need to be everywhere. And I would say that that is the problem of the planning system, where really, especially if the Russian government argues that this is a question of national security. So therefore, money should not be an object, and things should have been, should be done in all those places all over the country, should be done now, not later. So that's something else that I would say is very Soviet planning, and not really, a good thing. And the other thing that came out with this week was a suggestion about the cost of the MC-21. That it's both the MC-21, the SJ-100, the Ilyushin 114-300. That really the cost of those planes is actually going to go up to be equivalent to, in the case of the MC-21, equivalent to the cost of the 737 MAX or the A320neo. And I saw a figure which was talking about somewhere around the price has gone up to from about 55 to 58 million dollars about last year, and now we're talking about 85 billion or whatever, something similar to what Airbus and Boeing. But we do know that planes, you may have the list price, but depending on the deal that you do, you're not necessarily paying the list price. You're paying, something, you're paying something else. I have just seen a message from Tata saying hello. Hello, Tata. Thank you very much for joining the my very first live stream. You can give me grades afterwards as to how well you think I'm doing. So, and Tata, if you have any questions about me, you're most welcome. Just say what you think. And just to say, out of interest, you may wonder what's the background the background with all the planes in the background. That's actually London Heathrow Airport, but in the virtual world of that sim at the moment. So I thought this would be a nice background where you've got some activity other than my face to look at. So moving on, just to say about the information about the cost I was talking about, the suggestion is that that information actually came out from Izvestia, one of what is referred to as a pro-Kremlin daily. So the idea that that price is that, so therefore you can sort of trust what information is about the cost of the planes. But I guess the key issue is about how you fund it. So the suggestion is that it's not that the airlines are going to buy. I mean, come on, the major airlines are owned by the Russian government. That basically you're going to use the funds from the Wealth Fund to buy the planes and then loan it to the airlines. So the fact of the matter is that it may well be that you're just playing with numbers. So I think that the implication of that is not particularly clear. But I think if you were selling it to other countries who have the option of buying Airbus and Boeing planes, your price will definitely have to be more competitive. Because are you going to choose what is something that has got history, recognition, and reliance? Are you going to pay the same price as something that is new to the market? And it's interesting that I remember when the SJ, the Superjet, as it was then, the Sukhoi Superjet, came out, Interjet tried to use the Superjet as with a cheaper price as a means of trying to break into the market. That didn't quite work, and the reason was because the Sukhoi relied on other companies for the manufacturing of parts and so on, and parts were really hard to come by, and that was a problem. And this is why, in terms of the planning system about the MROs, it's really important that you get that right. That must be right from day one. Teething problems, you may say, oh, it's new and therefore some teething problems, but teething problems, what they do is that they damage your reputation. If you've already got a reputation, in the case of Airbus and Boeing, and think about Boeing with the MAX and the problem with the MCAS system, for all that problem, because it has a reputation going back, it still has a level of trust, and people will still go on the plane, and it's still certified by the regulators. So that's an advantage that the MC-21 just doesn't have. Although, if the intention is to just use it within Russia, we'll see. But I'll go more into the SJ-100 and the MC-21. But I just want to make a comment about, the Ilyushin 96400M, for which we have very little information about that, very little information about what's going on. And we have to wait and see. But I tend to say that when people are quiet in that particular way, there's not much going on. Yeah? Because if you've got good news, people come out and they publicize it and they say how great we're doing and so on and so forth. But when you have nothing to report, nothing positive to report, you keep stum, you say nothing. Okay? And if you get any questions, you say, we're dealing with it, we're working hard, and we'll announce something in due course. That's what you do. You blag. Okay? So just to talk about the SJ-100 with the fully import substitution aircraft, which is going through the certification flights at the moment, and there was another plane that entered the program in the last few days. And in terms of just to get a better understanding of the sort of things that's been done, is really pushing the aircraft beyond what will be its limits. So, for example, a latest test, the speed of the aircraft was, supposed to be 334 knots, a Mach decimal 87, where really it's more than Mach decimal 05, more than what it would normally do when the maximum when the aircraft is in operation, therefore Mach decimal 82. So just testing to try and break the plane to see if anything would really, to see how resilient it is. And those results seem to come out to be really quite positive in terms of how the test program is going. And certainly the expectation is that will, in 2025, things will be, the certification program will complete. But I think that obviously it has to enter into serial production. I think that's where we don't have enough information about that. And I hesitate with some doubt any figure that's given out about what the production levels would be. I think the thing to understand is that Russia and neither the Soviet Union really, well, okay, let's refer to Russia, yeah, really does not have a record of really producing a lot of planes. Just doesn't have it. So you're trying something that is relatively new, and so I'm really going to wait to see what that would be. And then you've got the issue about, the MC-21, which we know there are 13 MC-21 in the test program at the moment, although there are slight variations with the initial ones having Western parts and the latest ones being fully Russian substituted. But I have my doubt because sometimes a United Aircraft Corporation give out what one might describe as conflicting information, where it's supposed to be a fully input substituted program, that aircraft that's flown a flight, and then next moment you're reading, or for example the latest one, that they expect that to complete input substitution of the floor panels and luggage compartment panels, and it's planned to be produced in Podolsky. So it's like, well, is it in there or is it not there? I accept that floor panels are not necessarily critical in relation to the plane itself, but I think the information that's come out from United Aircraft Corporation, under a lot of pressure, time pressure, I have to say, is and no aircraft manufacturer is perfect, is really perfect. As I said, no, it's really perfect, but really, I think that little bit of contradiction is actually not positive in terms of the program itself. We know these things take time. If you take, China's Comac C919, which does have a lot of Western tech in it, started, in 2028, and first flight 2023, commercial service 2023. So if you compare, then that's 15 years. If you compare what essentially has been done in a rush from 2022, although you have to take into account some of the work that was done before, but without the time pressure, you have to say that a lot is being done within a relatively short period of time. A lot is being done. So, I have no criticisms in relation to that, but obviously, whatever they do, they have to make sure the aircraft is safe. But, I will, before I invite any questions, I'll just close on this point. If you look at the Russian aviation sector and the sort of the accident record, and the thing is that it's whether or not you want to accept as legitimate the information that's coming out from MAX, the organization that does the investigation. You say that since 2022 it's been really safe, especially when the maintenance, they're having to deal with their maintenance, or in terms of getting parts, having to get them in a roundabout way, that actually it is not just amazing, but actually it's a testament to the Russians, or you could say, quite understandably, that it's been luck. That there has not been any serious accident. There's been, in America we see a lot of times, a lot of things that are happening in the country in terms of accidents. If you listen to vast aviation, there always seems to be something done. There are crashes, there are near misses and all that kind of thing. And to some extent, it may well be that that's happening in the Russian system and we're not seeing it. But in terms of what has been put, it seems relatively safe. But then the one thing I'll say is that I think it was the crash of, I think, the Azari Embraer E190, which is supposed to have been shot by by accident by the Russian military, and that was supposed to have been shot over Grozny. Okay, now Grozny is in Russia. I would expect that the authorities, investigating authorities, will have information about that, or at least as one of the things they're investigating. Okay, the plane did not end up crashing on Russian territory, but the point is that if that happened over Russian territory, or the possibility, then one would expect there would be some kind of investigation in relation to that. There isn't at all. So that's, I think so. You have to wonder about to what extent the information that's being received is quite accurate. So you take something, you maybe you come to a view, but you always have to leave a little bit, leave some room that maybe the information might be not as accurate as you think it might be. Right. Well, for a first stream, I think I've rattled on for about 26 minutes. I'll give a minute to see if there are any questions. If there are, then I'll answer them. If there are no questions, then I'll wrap up and get away from this really hot room that I'm sitting in. I couldn't have the fan running because that would have been quite noisy, and I certainly don't want to make your ears hurt with rattling noise of a fan. Obviously, no air conditioner because it's not normally not this hot in good old Blighty. So that's it. I'll give a minute for any questions, and that's it. And I think I should have a drink whilst that is happening, as I can hear the birds on my roof. They really love to spend time with me in the morning, just making noise. Sometimes I wonder if they're in the loft. But I've looked a few times; they're not there. So I'm still assuming they're on the roof. They're on the roof. Although I plan to get a drone. Okay, I keep faffing about that. I plan to get a drone to go up on the roof and look and see what state it is. I could send somebody up there, but apparently the requirement is that it's too high for a ladder. I have to get scaffolding, and scaffolding costs a small fortune. And I think a drone is much more sensible. So let me see. Okay, there are no questions, and as a result, first stream out. See you next time. Goodbye.